How long are you guys in New York?
We actually leave tonight. We've been here for about a week.
I know, I was sick. I was so sad I couldn't go on Monday.
Oh, no.
How was the show?
It was fun.
Yeah, it was really fun.
That venue is so cute and small.
Mm-hmm.
It's so hard because I think I love that size. Like, that is, like, we just did a few of those nights in LA in the same size venue. I think it's my, like, favorite
Ideal.
size venue, but I mean, obviously, you could never afford to tour that way, like,
Right.
play, like, with, I mean, if you want production and a band and crew and whatever. But it's just the perfect amount of, like, it's enough people to just be truly exciting, but then also intimate enough to have, like, a real connection.
Right.
It's just the best. It's very good for the soul.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you guys just do the new album or?
We actually just did, like, 4 songs from the new album, but we've been slowly reworking all the old songs, so it was, like, kind of, like, testing out some of these new arrangements, and
Right.
it was a fun night. Getting our chat on, you know.
Right. Whenever you're ready. All right, cool. You guys ready?
Yeah.
So it's been, what, 3 years since your last album came out. How does it feel to, putting out your 8th album now?
We're really excited to be back with our 8th record. And it sort of sounds maybe disingenuous to say this, but every record I think, maybe this is the last one. Like, what if people don't want us to have another record? Or what if there's not interest? Or what if we like, our song, I don't know, like, body of work is like, it's done, like, we've done it all, and like nothing else comes, like writer's block or something. So it's kind of weird. Every time we start a new cycle, I feel this like crazy gratitude that it's all happening again.
For you guys, what was it like in the studio? Kind of describe the energy writing and putting this album together.
When we went in to record Love You to Death, we had the amazing privilege to get to work with Greg Kurstin again. So this is our second time working with Greg. This time he did the entire record, which is very exciting. And I think the best part of being in the studio with Greg is that I really do think he understands Sara and I and the way that we write, and he's able to elevate our ideas without dismantling them. And I don't feel there's any ego in the way that the three of us work together. In particular, I love that Greg is just such a crazy, amazing, well-versed, across the spectrum, talented musician. So it's also really easy because he can jump in and play drums. He can actually play bass, but he can also program and has bazillions of keyboards and toys and fun. And it just feels like a very creative place to be. Whereas I've always kind of associated, and probably for good reason, and it was necessary, but I've associated a lot of like stress and anxiety and challenge to being in the studio, and Greg takes away a lot of those things from the experience. So I think the vibe was just very creative, and Sara and I were we wanted to elevate our sound even further. We wanted to challenge our audience again and ourselves, and we wanted to take risks with the music and explore more of the 90s, late 80s, early 90s sounds that influenced a lot of our young years.
Greg is one of these people that have worked with so many different people, but his sound is so different with everyone. What do you kind of feel like you learned from him in the studio? I mean, he's such an amazing producer. I think he could have like 4 different names and people wouldn't even know. That, like, he did this with Pink, and then this with Sia, and then he does Adele's comeback single. It's like, what the fuck?
Yeah. I think the greatest thing about Greg Kurstin is he works with people who are you're not gonna hear Sia and not know it's Sia. Like, he's gonna work with Adele. Always know it's Adele. Like, these are people who have a very established character and sound and voice, and I feel sort of honored that in a way by working with Greg, we get to be that voice too. He's not changing it or distorting it in some kind of way where people don't recognize that it's us. I think that was sort of what allowed us to feel confident with changing the sound a bit and going in more of a pop production, was because we knew that our voices were still going to be incredibly recognizable. And in terms of learning from him, he's sort of one of these people where Tegan and I see ourselves as being very confident. We have a lot of experience. This is our 17th year in the music industry. But Greg, for us, brings a whole new experience, and in a way, it's an education to be in the room with him. And his ideas or suggestions I think strengthen the work that Tegan and I bring into the studio, and often any enhancements or suggestions, it never made me feel like, oh, my songs aren't good enough, or oh man, I'm not like living up to this like standard. It was often just like, oh wow, this is so cool to have this really brilliant, prodigious musician and producer help strengthen what we've already done naturally and intuitively.
You're talking about a little bit going to the pop sound. How did that come about? Was that just in the studio naturally? Kind of explain that.
I mean, the Tegan and Sara catalog, obviously spans now almost 2 decades. We started writing when we were teenagers, so obviously so much has changed musically. Like the actual, music industry itself has transformed completely since the start of our career. So I think there's been a natural evolution from our first record to this record, and I think that over the last couple records specifically, pop music has sort of exploded again and has a real cool factor to it. And I think that's partly because pop has now, like the definition of pop has expanded yet again, and there's just a ton of fusion happening in pop, and I think that excited Sarah and I. We'd been sort of in the indie rock community for a long time, and we'd done very well there, and we seem to have garnered a lot of like critical praise and a lot of respect, but I think there was still something lacking for us. We felt that we were still kind of limited, and I think probably a lot of that was that guitar is not our primary instrument, piano was, so writing on keyboards and writing piano and moving into more melodic pop stuff felt more natural, and we wanted to explore that. And there's always that fear that you're going to get stagnant, that you're going to get boring, that you're going to just play it safe and your audience is going to be like, see ya. And we didn't feel like it was the end of our career. There was this very odd sensation before our last record where we thought we were almost restarting our career, like we'd been gifted another decade or something. And I think we just continued that with Love You to Death. Pop continues to be very interesting. It's actually kind of hard to write a pop song. It's hard to simplify your idea to a point where it can speak to anyone. I can relate to you. I can relate to this person over here. We've all had different experiences, and yet pop speaks this very universal language, and we love the challenge of that.
Talk about the songwriting for this album. How do you just, if you have an idea, do you jot it down, or do you go into the studio say, hey, let's write track A? Like, how does that work?
Mm-hmm. Generally, when Tegan and I get off of touring, an album, we'll give ourselves like a bit of a break, let things sort of, I like to think of it like you're sort of like regenerating, you're like tired, and you've had these experiences on the road, and you sort of just need time to process everything and sort of like get back up to 100%. And usually, for both of us at different times in our career, we've had like bursts of writing, or sometimes it's a little bit slower. Especially for me, I need a longer period of time for those songs to sort of come to the surface. But we work very independently. We both have home studios, and we'll start to write and record material and send songs back and forth. And we generally, we'll write maybe like somewhere between 40 and 50 songs for an album. And once we sort of have been able to, let's call it 10 to 14 songs that we feel like are like album material contenders, that's when we'll go into the studio. We don't like to like spend money until we know what we have. I know a lot of people like jam and like go and work out ideas, and we've always been really like, you get the songs, you know what you have, and then you go into the studio and you record.
Right. So for this album, you guys probably wrote around 40 to 50.
Maybe a little less this time. I think this time we both maybe we're more in the ballpark of like 30 to 40. But it's hard because sometimes songs will transform. Like Tegan especially, she'll start with one song and then she'll send me a song called something else, and she'll be like, oh, but it's actually that other song, but with like a new verse and a new chorus. And then she'll send me like another song, and she'll be like, so that's that song plus this song. And then I sped it up, and then I sang it backwards. And I'm just like, oh my God, it's hard to keep up with like which songs are which sometimes. But, the good ones always sort of stand out, and actually it's been a fairly easy process for us to decide like what is an album contender and which songs aren't.
Let's talk about the single Boyfriend. What was it like coming up with that song?
I mean, when I write songs, often I rely on Tegan. I mean, not always, but like sometimes I'll send Tegan a song and not even know like, is this good or isn't it? Is it not good? And Tegan thought Boyfriend was a potential single, or like at least an album contender right from the get go. But I think it really it had its transformation in the studio. Greg kind of got his hands on it, and it really started to become like Well, actually, that's not true. Remember we did a first bout of recording, and then we kind of went away for a few weeks. And when we came back, we wanted to play our managers and the record label what we had done so far, and we forgot about Boyfriend. And then last minute, we were like, oh yeah, we had that song Boyfriend. And then it was like with fresh ears, it was sort of like, oh yeah, this is like a song that is going to do well, I think.
What about 100 Times? Talk about that song.
Sarah and I were really open to the idea of songwriting, not just with each other. We'd started to do that, but songwriting with other people. And one of our favorite collaborators is this guy, Jesse Shakin, who had been working for Greg when we made Heartthrob. And Sarah and I really got along with him. He recorded all our vocals for Heartthrob and just has a very...
poor man.
I know. He has like a very good nature and he's very funny. And we had kind of like a good comic like rapport with him. And I had gone into the studio with him to write with Carly Rae Jepsen, and said to Sarah that I'd had a really good time with him and thought that maybe we should go into the studio and do something with him. And then I can't remember what it was, but I got sort of like held up and couldn't go into the studio, and we had to have maybe like 2 or 3 days blocked with him, and Sarah and him had written a song one day on their own and then written something else, and I came into the studio late into this process and they were working on 100 Times. And there was a lot of debate about, should it be piano, should it be full big bombastic ballad, what should it be? And so I contributed a little bit to the song, but the real meat and potatoes of the song Sarah and Jesse had crafted. And the funniest part of the song is that Sarah was really starting to muse on our relationship and trying to write from a place of thinking about times in our working and sibling relationship that were very difficult. There were obviously like the dark years of Tegan and Sara where we struggled and suffered and pushed and pulled and had growing pains. And I was in the studio being like, Sarah's writing this epic, sad love song. And I was like, contributing all these, like, it was cruel of me, like all these, like, weird melodic kind of ideas. And it was only much later, like the record was already done when Sarah admitted that a lot of these songs, I guess it should have been obvious to me, but they weren't romantic love songs. They were about us hating each other. But,
oh, it's not as...
Not hating, but, like the dark times, like that we are very past. But it was a really neat experience because it's very outside of the way that we usually typically write. It's hard to be emotional and vulnerable in front of people, and write that way. So it was a very exciting time because I could see that we were really uncovering new ground.
What's it like to kind of do all this, make all this music and, fulfill your dreams with your sister? Because I imagine it's obviously a different, because you already have a relationship outside of your career, but your career and your music is obviously so important. So it's like family and music.
It's super fun.
It's funny because we actually started our first band when we were 15, and it's really all we've known since then. I mean, over half our life has been writing songs together and performing in some capacity, whether it was in high school bands or as the adult project Tegan and Sara, And it's hard because it's sort of, sometimes actually we'll get asked this question, like, what is it like to be twins? And we don't have any other siblings. I don't really have any other reference point. I can sort of tell you what I think is probably unique about having someone who looks like you and, is developmentally going through a lot of the same things at very important times in their life, and the sort of intimacy and connection that allows. But similarly, like, I don't know what it's like to not be in a band with Tegan. I've never been in a band with anybody else, and it's made up the majority of our experiences as adults. And so I can say that it's probably allowed us a very unique amount of trust. I think that there's not these sort of like inherent difficulties that sometimes I think other just normal people in bands go through. Like, I never worried that Tegan's gonna like steal my money or like, or go solo. Like, I'm just like, go ahead. I think we're sort of like outrageously supportive of one another and each other's biggest, champions and cheerleaders. So I do think there's something really, really wonderful about that. And I also think that somebody recently said this to us, and it really hit home, but because our relationship is so deeply important as both siblings and then professionally in this band as songwriters, the relationships around us are very special. And so we require quite an intense level of commitment from the people in our lives, both friends, romantic partners, the people we work with. We sort of develop quite intense attachments, and we can be a bit of a not a slow burn, but like once we really trust someone and like someone, it's like they might be lifers, like our managers we've worked with for almost our entire career. Once those relationships are established, they're very, very deep connections.
You were talking about writing with other people like Jesse. Are there any other writers? I know Jack Antonoff worked on the last album. Is he on this album?
No, the only collaboration we did on this record was with Jesse Shakin on 100 Times, and then he also worked on a song with us that we ended up using part of for Dying to Know. And then we worked in the studio a little bit with Greg. Like, he's really great at taking, like a song and saying, okay, this is really awesome, we built it up to this point, and then he'll spin around in his chair and be like, needs a bridge, and then, we get into it. So there's a little collaboration with him in that sense. So, but uniquely for us, like almost over half the record, we ended up collaborating on a bridge or a chorus or something, and I think it's given the record a real cohesive start to finish feel. Like, it really does feel like both of our voices are reflected in both songs, or in every song. So, and that feels exciting. I mean, it feels like the most Tegan and Sara record I could ever imagine. Cause
I mean, in a way, it actually, like, quite literally is, like, the smallest circle of people that we've ever worked with before.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's like not a lot at all.
No.
That brings us up to 4 people who worked on the record.
Some of these songs have like 8 songwriters.
Yeah.
I think that there's something really cool about the way that music is being made right now. Like, I love this idea that you can work with all these people and these collaborators, and especially working in the pop world. I mean, I hesitate to say anything critically about the way people are working right now, because, like, who cares if
Whatever
the song
works.
is great
Right.
and it took a village? Like, I don't really
Yeah.
care. But I will say that, for us, I think there's something unique about the way we've worked in pop music. Like, we're really interested in the sound and the sonic presentation, and it's been fun for us to kind of, like, make things bigger so it reads bigger. But what it's actually forced us to do behind the scenes is make the circle a bit smaller. On some of our more, like, indie rock records, there was quite a collaboration. We would work with drummers and bass players and guitar players, and there was a lot of, like, jamming and, like, that kind of thing. This has been, like, the majority of this record is just me and Tegan and Greg, and I think allows
at
a more
some point we
cohesive
stopped
voice.
apologizing too for the fact that, like, we are. I mean, Sarah called us controlling earlier, but I think what we are is we're very clear on what it is we want. And when I'm sitting at home,
Actually, she called us micromanaging.
Yeah. But, like, I sit at home and write a song. I'm not just singing it into my iPhone. I mean, I get it in Logic and I will track 30 or 40 different ideas. So by the time I get it into the studio to Sarah and Greg, they have a really clear idea. No one's turning around being like, so what is this to you, a ballad? Or, like, it's very clear. I'm like, that 4 on the floor and this part and this thing and this, like, and Greg just takes it and just, like, runs. It's like a 100-meter dash, with it. So I think there's something really exciting about getting to the part of your career where you feel like you know what you want. It feels really exciting. And I think we probably just stopped apologizing for feeling like we know what we want. I think, thankfully, it seems like it resonates with people and it's working and we're achieving the success that we want. But ultimately, first and foremost, it's about satisfying your artistic desires. And my artistic desire is to say what I want.
Nice. Your songs capture kind of like teen angst, and it just sometimes reminds me of, like, prom. And what's it like? How do you describe that sound, and how, like, I don't even know what I'm asking, but it's just like the sound has this kind of unique, like, I feel like you're in the studio yelling, like, going crazy, but it's also very calm too. Even when you watch the videos, you guys are just, like, chilling out. You know what I mean? You're not going crazy.
I mean, I think that, part of making pop music is sort of embracing, the culture that is invested and interested in pop music. And I guess that skews fairly young. So, I mean, I don't think of it necessarily like, I think that we're dealing with the issues and concerns and anxieties and reflections of 35-year-old women. Like, that's what we are. I'm 35 years old, and I think I've become really good at articulating and deconstructing the complexities of love and relationships and a sibling relationship and a romantic relationship, even identity, like, talking about sexuality and gender and how that sort of has, influenced my experience in relationships. But it's also pop. You want to write a pop song, and it's not it's not your dissertation for your PhD. Sometimes I have to tell myself that, like, take it back a little bit, like, simplify this a little bit. What's the nucleus of, like, what you're trying to say? And and I think in pop music sometimes, when it's simpler, it can be more impactful. And then also recognizing that the audience, your target audience, sometimes I'm not saying that there's not older people or younger people, but you sort of know what your middle section is, and those are your peers, and those are the people that you're writing to and for and about. And so that there's a balance there. You don't want to dumb it down, but you also don't you don't want to overcomplicate it.
Right, nice. You had so much success with the last album. How do you feel you guys have grown in the last 3 years?
It was funny the other day, someone said to me, like, you keep using the word cycle. Like, what does that mean? And I'm like, oh, like the time period from when you start writing and recording a record to the time where you finish touring it. We call that an album cycle. And Heartthrob was from start to finish almost a 4-year cycle. And in that time, we played hundreds of shows and toured all over the world, went to a lot of countries for the first time, met a bazillion people, had a bunch of different experiences. And in that time, we also personally, I think, went through a lot, breakups, the passing of people that we love. The world itself just changed. Just so much happens. And so it's funny when you get into the studio, when you sit at home and start writing songs and getting into the next phase, it's incredible how much growth happens. It's incredible how much things have changed. And I think that, when I look back at my life, I see everything in those cycles, and I just think about literally how much our bodies are the muscle, just singing those songs over and 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 over again. Thankfully, at the end of that, something comes of that, which is, so much experience. And I think that you're able to bring that maturity and experience into the next phase of your career and the next cycle.
And you guys were signed to Neil Young's label, right?
No,
okay.
When our first record deal when we first started at 19 was with Neil Young's record label, and his manager Elliot Roberts flew up to Calgary where we were where we grew up, and we signed a record deal with him, and we have worked in some way with them throughout our career. They've been wonderful resources for us and supporters for us, but we are now and since 2007 signed with Warner Brothers.
Okay, just because I wondered if you were signed to Neil Young's label, do you play your album for Neil Young?
We do send them an advance copy always.
Yes.
Always pay respects to the person who helped you build the career. They've been integral in our career and still had a hand in a lot of the more recent releases, but the biggest role that they've played was encouraging us when we were 19 years old to follow our own path and find our own voices. There was a very poignant speech about you could go this way, and there's you're taking a real risk. If you don't have success, there's a chance a major label won't be interested in you for very long. But there's this path, and this path is harder, and there's less money, and you're going to struggle, but it's going to give you time to develop as an artist. And that's, quite literally the best gift you can be given as a young artist is time to develop. And there's just not that time anymore. So we really, in a huge way, owe our incredibly long career to Neil Young and his manager, Elliot Roberts, because they afforded us that time.
Probably have time for a few more questions. Let me see. So I really like Dying to Know. Can you talk about that track?
Mm-hmm. So Dying to Know was what we were calling a Frankenstein song, a Franken-song, really, because it was sort of this almost like a writing exercise, I guess you could say. We were right at the end of the record process, recording the album, and there were a few songs that we really liked, and they had sort of been we kind of talk about them oh, should we pick up on that song again? Should we do this thing? And Greg said, here's what I love the verse to this song, I love the chorus to this song, I like the bridge of this song. What if we change all the keys to be the same key, and then we change all the lyrics so that there's a cohesive narrative, and we Franken-song these great ideas. And so that's what we did. And he
literally just got up from his chair, went and sat at the piano and was like, okay, you sing Work. So I start singing the beginning of that song or whatever, and then he's like, okay, it's a little awkward, but now sing the chorus of that song. So that's the pre-chorus. And then he was like, okay, Sarah, now okay, it'll be this. And Sarah started singing
the chorus to another
song, and I was like,
Franken-song.
And we didn't even really have to change that many of the lyrics. And in this very strange way, it was these two very different songs that all of a sudden had a very similar message about this, relationship. And it was very strange. But
actually, maybe the most complicated part was the Dying to Know, that hook, because
the
words, the hook, because there was something I think we tried 8 or 9 different variations of that.
The original lyric was, it's like right on the tip of my tongue, but it was like something about love, and you were like, ugh, I do not want to have a song with the word love in it.
And then maybe it was like something.
It was like remember it was like make time for love.
Yeah, or something. And then it was like, and then we sort of arrived at
Sarah
like.
hates the word love.
No, I just.
It's an album title.
It's just yeah, but it's,
But in the lyrics, like, she
Yeah.
didn't want to sing it.
No. And I think it's like sometimes love is being used in a way where it's like, what are you really trying to say? And we sort of would keep going back and forth, and then finally, I think I actually was the one that said something like, I need to know or I want to know, and Tegan said, what about dying to know? And Greg was like, that's it. That's because sometimes it's actually the words that allow a hook to really, embed its
Be
way into
memorable.
your brain.
Yeah.
So that was a really fun one for us because it was super collaborative. I hate to say Franken-song because I'm afraid that people will then think that the song is somehow less of a like.
No, it was like
great
two
song,
songs that
but-
we really loved that were gonna get trashed.
Yeah.
And there's nothing we hate more than these like there'll be these like really these glimmers of like amazingness in a song, but it just didn't get there.
Yeah.
It's like an incomplete idea, and usually we're just like on to the next one. And it was such a moment because it was like I really didn't want to let go of this one song, and Sarah didn't want to let go of this one song, and it was so wonderful to be able to fuse it together and then create this theme, the dying to know. Yeah, that was
Which
a
I
fun
hope,
moment.
Like I also think it's like a funny thing too because everybody, especially in the age of the internet and social media, everybody like is peering in on their exes or like whatever, like some estranged friend that you had a fight with. Like we're all sort of like snooping around, trying to like, oh yeah, what's she up to? Like, like okay, yeah, it looks like everything's going great or whatever. But we all have that. Like we all want to know. We're all dying to know. And so I like that Tegan's approach is a little bit cooler at the front, like top of the song, and then the chorus is kind of like the desperation that we all feel like when we're like Instagram stalking.
Nice. I wanted to ask too about the wildfires we've been covering all week.
Oh, in
was
Fort
that
McMurray.
near where you guys grew up, or?
It's really north of where we grew up, but it's still, I mean, it's so significant.
Probably like
'cause-
6 or 7 hours
yeah,
north.
it's gotten very close to encroaching on another city that we spent a lot of time growing up in. So it's so sad. I mean, it's horrific and sad, and just like it's absolutely astonishing how quickly things can just get so out of control and just everything can be gone. And it's just, I mean, it's dumbfounding that there's thankfully like everyone was able to get out, and like, but just the photos, the video of it all of it is just so sad. The stories that have been coming out, it's just awful. And of course you just always think, how can we help? How can we use our soapbox to like, raise money and do more and reach out to people? And it's just, it's been kind of awful, just the whole thing. It's just it's very close to home,
It's interesting too, like being born and raised in Alberta to, obviously we didn't know anyone in Fort McMurray, but it's like, it's not a big province. There's probably a couple million people that live in the whole province itself. So, everybody knows somebody who or knows somebody who knows somebody. So it's amazing how quickly it just feels so impactful because it's like 6 hours from where we grew up. And,
We actually just, our manager forwarded us
crazy.
an email from a Tegan and Sara street teamer who's been working on the street team off and on since 2005. And she sent this, I mean, it's a very sweet but very heartbreaking story about, thankfully she was able to get out. Her family and friends were able to get out. But one of the last things she did when she ran out of the house was grab this signed Tegan and Sara CD that she had. And I was like, that's so sweet. But also just, wow, like really makes it real. You know what I mean? Like it's different when you're watching it on the news. You can sort of, wow, that's so sad, but then you can kind of move on. But as soon as it's humanized by like somebody or you meet somebody or you hear the story, it's profoundly upsetting.
I wanted to ask too, on the top of the charts. On the top of the charts here in the U.S., it's been dominated by like Drake, Bieber, and Weeknd. How's it feel to see your fellow Canadians kind of kill it in the U.S.?
When we first started out, 1999, 2000, coming down to the States, it almost felt like Canada was further away than it really was. Like we grew up like 2 hours from the border, like between Canada and the States, but it was like going down to the States felt like a different planet to us. And the internet wasn't what it is now, and music, the sort of crossover of artists from country to country was just not the same. I mean, there was big Canadian artists who had made it, but they were like, people would always ask us about like Celine Dion or like the Bare Naked Ladies. Like, it was like these acts that were colossal, had sold like 100 million records or something. So it's been really interesting in the 17 years that we've been coming to the States to see the like Canadian takeover. Like, you know, even in the indie world when we first started, it was like bands like Arcade Fire, for example. I remember Leslie Feist, who had a big record and she won a Grammy. And I remember seeing her perform on the Grammys, and I was like, Leslie Feist is from Calgary. Like, oh my goodness, this is so crazy. So now it's kind of funny. Like, we're almost like a bit.
We're used to
We're
it
used
now.
to it now. We're like, of course,
like-
Justin Bieber's from Canada. Like, you know, whatever. But it's actually been like to see like Carly Rae Jepsen and The Weeknd and all of these artists really starting to
It's awesome.
do so well.
You know what it's
cool.
really doing? I mean, it's obviously so wonderful that they're doing well in America, but what it is really doing, it's really reinvigorating the Canadian music industry. Obviously, in Canada, there's a lot of government grants and a lot of like money that comes from taxes that actually gets funded or gives funding to artists like us to make music videos, travel internationally, fund small business projects. And what's amazing about Canadian talent doing so well internationally is it reinvigorates those funds. It makes people go, yes, we need to continue to fund small acts, develop young bands, you know, like it's win-win. Like, you know, Drake and Bieber and Weeknd absolutely have a hand in helping to support the arts in Canada just by default by being successful. So it's kind of great.
Not a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing. Communism and socialism at
No,
work, people.
don't. That is not a quote. That's not true. We're just a democratic society who loves the arts.
We just love paying taxes.
We have an entertainment show in London called Entertainment Now. So if you guys don't mind looking in the camera and saying, hi, I'm Tegan and Sara, and you're watching Entertainment Now.
Sure. Hey everybody, we're Tegan and Sara.
And you are watching Entertainment Now.
Thank you so much. We'll do photos quickly
Sure.
in the next row.